If you are planting everything on one random day in the spring, you are missing out on a huge opportunity to get more out of your garden. Hey, I'm Nadia, and I own an online garden planner which lets people design their gardens and give them a personalized planting schedule. But in today's video, I want to show you how you can make your own planting schedule, because here's the thing. If you are planting at the wrong time or at a less than ideal time for your climate, you are missing out. Or you're potentially doing some harm to your plants, right? So one of two things can typically happen if you're planting at the wrong time. Either you plant too early and you could potentially kill your plants, right? Like if I went outside and planted in my garden, let's say like tomato plant, or even this basil plant. I have a basil plant that I got. It is way too early for me to be planting basil in my climate. So if I tried to plant this outside in my garden, it would die, right? So that's kind of I feel like the more obvious way of like planting at the wrong time. Now, if I planted it too late, I could also be missing out, because let's use basil as another example. Let's say it was the right time. Like, let's say it was warm enough and I could be planting basil or tomatoes or something, and I waited a month before I ended up planting it. Well, then I'm missing out, right? I could have been getting food potentially a month earlier if I had planted it earlier in my garden. So there is a sweet spot with your plants. And sadly, well, it's good and bad, but there isn't one time for everything that you want to grow. Different plants have different desires, right? Like some plants like to be planted earlier in the spring, and other ones need it to be really warm in like late spring, even sometimes early summer, depends on where you live, that they want to be planted. So having a planting schedule can actually make a huge difference in your garden. So how exactly do you know when is the ideal time to plant? Well, it changes. There's a few variables here. So it depends on your climate, and it also depends on the plant's preference. And then it also depends on how you want to be growing it. Like, do you want to buy a plant from the garden center, or do you want to be growing from seed? So the first thing that we have to think about is your climate. Before we can actually figure out the ideal time that plant wants, we need your climate data. And I'm not talking about growing zone here. I'm actually talking about a date. And the date that we're interested in for this is your last frost date. If you haven't heard this term before, what it means is, on average, over the last, I don't know what it is, 30 years or so, the climate experts, they have determined when on average it stops freezing where you live. So at nighttime, when it stops dipping below freezing at night. That is your average last frost date, or just LFD, and that's the reference point that we're going to use when we decide when is your ideal planting time. Okay, so I have some seed packets here. Let's talk about growing from seed first. If you want to grow from seed, seeds actually breaks down into two separate categories as well. Do you want to, let's say you wanted to grow from seed, do you want to be planting from seed inside? Like, do you have a little seed starting set up in your house or in your garage or something? If that's the case, then you want to start your seeds indoors, and we're going to find that date, the ideal planting date for when you can actually do that. Or sometimes you actually want to plant seeds right in your garden. Like if you're going to plant carrots or peas or something like that, you're going to plant those right in your garden. So you're going to have a different date of when you actually start seed outdoors. Hopefully I'm not confusing you, but seeds is kind of broken down into those two categories. Let's use tomatoes though. Okay, so I have a packet of tomato seeds here. And on the packet, hopefully, not all seed packets tell you this, hopefully it will tell you when you should plant. So this one says, start in a warm location indoors 6 to 8 weeks before transplanting. And then it gets into hardening off after that, which I'll talk about in a second. So when it says start in a warm location indoors 6 to 8 weeks before transplanting, what they're saying is start it indoors 6 to 8 weeks before you're going to plant it outside. And let's see, when does it tell us when we should plant this outside? Plant outdoors in late spring after the nights have warmed. It's pretty vague. Inside the garden planner, we usually say a week is when we start recommending that you check. Just make sure that there's no frost in the climate. As long as there's no frost, you can put your tomatoes outside. So they're just saying after the nights have warmed. You can translate that into when they have stopped freezing. So my last frost date is April 26th. And if let's say I wanted to use that as my starting point. I'm planning on putting this out in my garden in and around that April 26th time frame. What I would do then for this tomato seed, because it says planted inside 6 to 8 weeks before that date, I would subtract, I would look at my calendar, and I would say, what is 6 to 8 weeks before April 26th? So let's just grab my calendar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so March 15th, that is 6 weeks, and March 1st is 8 weeks. So somewhere in that March 1st to March 15th range would be when I want to start my tomato seeds inside. And I have some books here as well, just to reference, show you other ways that you can find it. This is a really good book. If you're looking, it's kind of like a encyclopedia. And inside of this book, the author, she has all sorts of good information about plants. So you can, if you don't have it on your seed packet, or if you want to get more information about your planting dates, you can totally get a book like this, or you can Google it. So let's find tomatoes. She's saying set out 2 to 4 weeks after the last frost. That's kind of generous. We don't recommend it that late. You can set it out before that, but you follow whatever direction you want to. So if you want to follow a book like this, 2 to 4 weeks. She's also telling you how many days it takes to germinate, how many days you want to have it growing as a transplant. Really, the only date that you're concerned about in this book is count back from your last frost date 6 weeks or 42 days. And that's when she's recommending that you start seeds. So the same idea, right? 6 weeks before April 26th would be March 15th. So what you would do is you would just write a list for yourself, like tomatoes, start seeds indoors, March 15th. Or you can throw it in a calendar, whatever you want. But that's essentially what you want to do. You want to go through all the plants that are in your garden and you want to come up with an ideal date. If your seed packet doesn't tell you, I think these all do. If you're because sometimes I get seeds and it doesn't tell me. It doesn't tell me anything really. Then you're just going to need to Google it or look it up in a book if you want to do this stuff manually. Now let's look at something else where we would start it from seeds. I have turnips here, and all this seed packet is telling me is plant in early spring in well-cultivated soil. So it's not giving me any date reference for turnips. So if they don't tell you on the seed packet, like this one, they're just saying in early spring, I would translate that. You can try Googling it and see if someone else will tell you when to plant it, but if it says early spring, then typically that means that you plant it before your last frost date. So it's something that I did completely wrong when I was starting gardening. I thought everything had to be planted inside of my gardening window, which to me was April 26th, which was my last frost date up until when it started freezing again, or your first frost date in the fall. Like, I thought everything had to be done inside of that window. That's not the case at all. What they're saying here is that they want you to plant it earlier than that. So you could look it up. When did we say it? We're saying April 5th. How many weeks in advance is that? We're telling you 3 weeks. 3 weeks in advance of your last frost, we're suggesting that you plant your turnip seeds. You can try earlier, like some of these cool weather vegetables. I talk a lot about cool weather vegetables because I grow year round where I live. So what they're just saying is that you want to plant it earlier. Same thing with peas. Let's see, I buy like jumbo packs of peas. All right, these guys, what are they telling me? Sow seeds in successive crops every 2 weeks from early April to mid-May. This seed company is, they are local to where I live. Early April would be in and around that same period. So like 3 weeks or so before your last frost. So let's see what let's see what she tells. Because I want to give you guys how to do this yourself. So let's see what she says for peas. 35 to 56 days. So she's giving you an even more generous time frame than we are. And in fact, you can grow peas. Sometimes I see it say as soon as the soil can be worked. And what that means is once the soil is not frozen anymore. Whenever you can actually start digging into your soil and getting deep enough to plant the seed, then you can be planting, really. I would say like that 3 to 4 week range is typically as far as I like to go unless I'm using covers. But 3 to 4 weeks before, certainly something like peas, something like turnips, carrots I would assume is similar. Let's look at carrots. Okay, so carrots are very cold hardy and can be started early when the first leaves of spring bulbs appear. Okay, So it's still kind of vague, but what they're telling you is early, right? Like way earlier than April 26th, which was my last frost date. So when you're thinking about when is the ideal time to plant, really pay attention to what the seed packet is telling you. If it doesn't tell you anything, you can look at a book, you can Google it. There are ways that will give you like more of a concrete explanation as to when you should be growing it. Now you might be thinking, why can't I just plant it later? Why can't I just plant my peas and my radish and my lettuce even at the same time that I'm planting my tomatoes? I mean, you certainly can, but you're missing out, right? You're planting a lot later than when you could be. You could be planting so much earlier than that. And I mean, I have this other book. I'll just show you just so you guys can see that this is a very common thing that certainly farmers, like this is a excellent book, by the way. If you ever want to get into market gardening, this guy's awesome. He talks about ideal planting schedules as well. He has a whole section on that at the end. He has all sorts of different timing, and he has different dates that he wants to plant everything. And certainly farmers need to do it because they want to get food out to their consumers, to their customers as soon as possible, because that's how they get paid. But as a home gardener, you can absolutely do this too. You can be changing when you're planting to not only get a longer harvest period, because if I can be planting my carrots and my peas a month or more even earlier than my tomatoes, why wouldn't I do that? And not only that, some plants like it better in the cold weather. Some seeds germinate better in the cold weather. So paying attention to what they're recommending is going to give you better success in the garden for sure. And then when it comes to when is the best time to be planting a transplant that you buy, so a potted plant that I buy from the garden center, you follow kind of the similar logic. So you'd look to find out, I don't find that they usually tell you this on the plant label. So you're probably going to have to Google it or look it up in a book as to when can you actually start planting this in your garden. But if it's growing outside, so let's say you go to a garden center and all the plants are sitting outside and they're not taking them inside in a greenhouse at night, like they're always outside, these plants. If it's a local garden center to you, you can be pretty confident that if they're growing it outside in a pot, you can also be growing it outside in your own garden. However, if you go to a garden center, like I just bought these plants from a garden center on the weekend, and I bought basil. So this is okay, but my basil plant, it is way too early where I live to be planting basil. It doesn't tell me that on here anywhere. It doesn't tell me that. But let's look in our book. It is telling me to transplant this 14 days in after my last frost date. So that for me would be April 26th plus 2 weeks is May 10th. So this book, and certainly we agree with that in the garden planner, is saying 2 weeks after your last frost is when you want to be transplanting this basil. So even though they sold me this basil today, I have to keep it in my house or keep it warm in my garden if I want to do some winter protection until I can actually plant this outside. So if you're buying something in a greenhouse, you can't just assume that, oh, I bought it from a local supplier, that means I can transplant it into my garden. That's not the case. You're going to have to pay attention to when the ideal time is. You could try asking them at the garden center too, they might know. Now, after you've found out all of your ideal dates for when you should be planting everything, you can just write a list for yourself. So you'd write, when should you be starting things inside? When should you be starting seeds outside? When should you be hardening off? Because if you're going to be planting from seed inside, you have to transition it to outside. So you have to have, there's like a window there, about a week, where you transition your plants to the outside. So set yourself a date. When should you start hardening things off? And then when should you be planting in your garden? So there's a couple different categories there, but really, if you create yourself a planting schedule ahead of time, like if you do this now, at least at the time that I'm filming this, it's depending on where you live, assuming you have some sort of frost still, then you're going to be better off than if you just randomly go to the garden center and buy things whenever it's after your last frost and think, oh, now I should be planting everything, especially if you're going to be growing from seed. If you're going to be planting from seed, then I definitely recommend you think about your planting schedule well in advance, at least like a month, I would say, before your last frost. just to give yourself your ideal, your like maximum chance of success in your garden, and to give yourself way more time to be eating from your garden. So that is how you create a planting schedule. I have another video actually where I talk about how to create a planting schedule for a fall garden, for a fall and winter garden. If you want to check that out, I'll have a link. Otherwise, that is it for this week. I will see you in the next one.